This is the beautiful coast of California. We're in the oceanfront town of La Jolla, just north of San Diego. I'm Stephen Webb, and I read and publish books on fascinating subjects. If you're interested in the subject of ancient Lemuria and how it relates to people on the West Coast and elsewhere today, I've got some perfect beach reading for you. Looking out over the Pacific Ocean here with the sunlight on the water, it seems as though it's always been peaceful here. But there have been naysayers. Remember back in the 60s and 70s, there were predictions that California was going to slide off into the ocean. The San Andreas was the ever-present threat. Then the disaster movies, remember 2012, and that picked up on the persistent theme and made it loud and visual. But the big submersion didn't happen, and thankfully no sign of it today. Why did the concern seem so imminent that cataclysm was almost inevitable? It's possible that when certain people made those predictions, they weren't perceiving a threat in the future, but unresolved PTSD from a distant past. Nothing on that scale has happened in our recent memory. So where might that kind of dread perception have come from? Soul memory. Our soul retains the memory of every past life in a way our conscious memory can't. And that's a good thing, because if we had access to all the events in all of our previous lives, we'd be so preoccupied with them, we wouldn't get anything done in this life. And this is the life that counts. We're on an expedition. We feel the urgency to get things done now in this particular chapter of our book of life. Your book of life is not just a memory of a biblical event, a long time ago thing. It's relevant now. Your health and present circumstances are related to your good karma and your not so good karma. Think about this. If everyone is inevitably going to die, why aren't we all freaking out? No one walks around looking at their watch saying, man, I'm down to 40 years. Our ongoing soul has gone through the death of the body and rebirth in a new body thousands of times over eons. We go through this process of forgetting our past because of our unresolved karma. It's trapped energy with our imprint on it, meaning we're still responsible for it being unresolved. The problem is we don't know it's there as invisible packets of misused energy stacked in layers around us. There's no conscious recall of those lives, except for the few people that apparently have a pressing need to know. And even then, it's only in part. We don't talk about karma and reincarnation, at least to other people here on the beach, because we don't remember much more than intuitive hints. Where's our user's manual about what happens after our body wears out? Why does our passing on from this life have to happen anyway? If you wondered about this for yourself or family, this book, The Afterlife, What Really Happens in the Hereafter, is reassuring, comforting, and a steadying guide with helpful examples. This is Elizabeth Clare Prophet's kind and motherly advice in an easy reading format. Everyone's going to need this gentle illumination eventually, no matter how often we put it off. The table of contents for the afterlife confirms the continuity of life after physical death and explains why this is such an interesting and authoritative book. It begins with, where do we go and why? And then also, what is the surviving part of us that remains conscious after each incarnation's transition to the afterlife? Everyone's afterlife experience is unique because the effort you put into your life's interests is unique. What you value most in life is what steers you in the afterlife. Note that Mrs. Prophet is giving you first-hand accounts of observing and even instructing souls after their passing from the body. Some go willingly with angels to higher realms where they can be doing what they are supposed to be doing in the afterlife, preparing for rebirth. Others who are confused, unaware, or angry need personal guidance, or by their own free will want to be left alone in the astral realms of illusion. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, are explained as having important transformative purposes for those whose transition time has not yet arrived. Most of us are not aware of the extent of our influence on the network of people we know. An NDE is a gift, a wake-up call for self-correction in life. Then there's a brief explanation of the various understandings of heaven and hell held by Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, and Hindu cultures. On page 48, there's an amazing diagram of the 33 octaves of heaven and the 33 octaves of hell. Each octave exists in the same physical space, but vibrates at higher or lower frequencies at the subatomic level. A physical, visible world exists at the midway frequency as the platform for choice. Mrs. Prophet says, quote, "None of these octaves are up in the sky or down in the ground as people used to quaintly think in the past. Since we know that atoms and molecules are made up of mostly empty space, other octaves may exist in the same space we're occupying now. We cannot perceive them, and they cannot perceive us." Unquote. Next, Mrs. Prophet uses analyses of two movies, Ghost and Flatliners, as detailed examples of the dangers of discarnates or disembodied spirits, and the risks of simulating death as a means of avoiding karmic return. These risks can be mitigated or avoided by acquiring knowledge and a steady momentum of appealing to heaven for light and guidance every day of this life, for yourself and loved ones. In other words, you can be a positive instrument of God all your life. The idea of rebirth or reincarnation is explained as a matter of the precision return of energy you have put into motion in this and previous lives. Mrs. Prophet describes a classic fiction love triangle that spanned many centuries before the tangled energies could be resolved with understanding and forgiveness. For souls who are interested in avoiding lifetimes of tangled karmic tensions, there are opportunities in the etheric retreats under the supervision of ascended masters and angels to see past lives in the cosmic mirror and to transmute errors preemptively in the violet flame. Visualizing violet flame while you pray is even more effective while you're in your physical body. Why is it then that most Christian churches would tell you that you cannot believe in reincarnation and still be a Christian? Mrs. Prophet points out, quote, "Without reincarnation, it's only one life, and you either go to heaven or to hell. In reality, most of us aren't ready for heaven, but we're not bad enough to go to any place like hell." And Mrs. Prophet continues, "I know that Jesus did teach reincarnation, and I provide evidence to support that in my book, Reincarnation, the Missing Link in Christianity." This is a great read if you ever suspected that the Roman emperors Justinian and Constantine, overriding Jesus' teaching, were the doctrinal overseers of a state religion. Dependence on the clergy as a political means of controlling the people was a feature of the Dark Ages we no longer need to accept. In integrating it all, the question is asked, why are we here? The purpose and importance of physical incarnation is explained as a series of schools where we learn mastery and then graduate to greater schools of responsibility. What does graduation mean? Mrs. Prophet says, quote, "Know that you have all the help you need available to you as you develop your relationship with the Ascended Masters and the angels. They will champion your cause and prep you for your ultimate victory, your graduation from the wheel of birth and rebirth. And from the day of your ascension, your next life will be lived in the etheric levels of heaven. Becoming ready for heaven takes a lifetime or more of sustained effort in service to others and the gradual swapping of your accustomed human identity for your yet-to-be-realized Christ identity. In the afterlife, there are 3 amazing appendices describing how you can visit the spiritual retreats in the etheric octaves while you sleep at night. How to Talk with God, and the psychologist Carl Jung's own near-death experience and what he learned from it. And it might also interest you to know that the translation of the afterlife into Mandarin is selling strongly in Taiwan. Really? In more enlightened times, we readily accepted the cyclical process of the death of the physical body and rebirth or reincarnation. Now, it's rare to talk about it, if ever. The afterlife offers serious, helpful advice about what you can do right now for yourself and family. Think of your soul as a continuity, each life a chapter in a book with plot effects caused during previous chapters. What you accomplished in your previous lives made you what you are now. What are you doing to make your next life even better? You will have a next life. While we're sitting on this beautiful beach, we've got some time to look at our collective backstory, the history of the karmic fall of humanity in ancient times, why it happened, and the consequences we're still living with. Would it be helpful if we also had another user's manual to show us examples of what negative karma is, how it causes us to be reborn near the scene of the crime and near the people involved? If so, we could glean important lessons from our own history. But maybe that could be a little too personal and maybe a little too much for us to handle. What about a distillation? Using real-life examples of other people's karmic history over many lifetimes to illustrate what our priests and pastors and ministers don't seem to want to discuss. If reincarnation is a long series of opportunities, gifts of energy and renewal from God, we ought to be able to understand the causes and effects and act in time to improve ourselves. Look at this, beach reading or anywhere reading. This is Reincarnation, Stories of Mercy and Resolution. It describes multiple lifetimes of 9 influential historical figures in a lot of detail. All 9 of the influencers' journeys begin with the selected lives on Lemuria or later on Atlantis and on up into the 19th and 20th centuries. Most of them will reincarnate again in this century without remembering those major personal events. These are names you might recognize: Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, better known as FDR, Margaret Thatcher, Al Capone, Charles Lindbergh, and others. Their karmic choices in earlier lives affected their later lives in a chain of cause and effect. This eye-opening book on reincarnation might make you wonder, how can I get a manual on my previous lives, if I could even handle it? Start here with this book about others' choices. Understand the sway of emotions in key moments of free will, and let your conscience guide you through prayers to God every day in this life. The mercy and resolution part of the title is about the spirit of God's grace interceding to mitigate the letter of God's law, softening otherwise hard karmic landings. The book itself is an intercession of God's grace. Ask yourself, how did Mrs. Prophet as a teacher have access to the Akashic records of God's memory of all of these people's lives back to Atlantis and Lemuria? Only by grace, by the care of those who have graduated from our world because they no longer have any karma or any need to reincarnate. They prove their love for us individually, offering to coach us in careful steps and stages over a lifetime to become the living Word, ascended like them. One of these masters said, "To us, the highest proof is the quiet ascension of the single soul of God, who slips like a dewdrop into the morning sunlight." These masters can see all of our previous lives if needed. They respect our free will and answer our prayers. When the pupil is ready, the master appears, often through other people, in a way only you will recognize. When you're really ready to ask, what are these lives leading to? You might discern their answer through a new interest in the scope of your own soul history and responsibilities. How far back do our previous lives go? Better still, what is the point in ancient history where things got so messed up for everyone on Earth that we're still living with the fallout all these many lives and ages later? The major ancient problem we don't talk about much occurred many thousands of years ago, right out there where we're looking now, out into the Pacific. Several hundred miles to the west from here, on land now at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, there was a continent called Lemuria, supporting a once highly advanced, almost heavenly civilization. Lemuria stretched about 5,000 miles east to west and was originally formed from the upwelling of magma along the mid-Pacific ridge running north-south. Over eons, the solidified magma became millions of square miles of tropical land, a thick surface crust, still moving very slowly as two tectonic plates in opposite directions. One huge plate inched along a slow conveyor belt to the east, toward the distant fire ring of the Americas, and the other tectonic plate moved west toward Asia. But under the continental surface of Lemuria, there was a vast system of natural gas chambers. The same pattern of tectonic plate movement spread out from the mid-Atlantic ridge underneath Atlantis. These continents rode on land surfaces vulnerable to seismic disturbance throughout their existence. This map is an approximation of the extent of the ancient continent of Lemuria. You can see the equator ran through the middle of the continent, and what's left of its volcanic mountain ranges are now known as Easter Island to the southeast, Bora Bora, Tahiti, the Cook Islands to the south, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji to the southwest, the Marianas to the west, and the Hawaiian Islands to the north. At its height, tropical Lemuria was a far more advanced civilization than ours and was the preeminent culture and economic power on Earth long before Atlantis' rise and fall. What made Lemuria such a long-lasting, life-affirming civilization was its spiritual culture as the Motherland. Its vibe was that of the divine feminine, nurturing, gentle, generous, beautiful, glad to teach, and its people were rewarded with extraordinary attainments we would think of as miracles. They could precipitate their own food and housing by visualization and holy invocation. They didn't need mortgages or taxation. The understanding and practice of divine law, devotion, and constructive creativity were their daily occupations. They saw themselves as being sent on an expedition for mastery in the physical realm aligned with their divine origin and spirit. Unlike us now, each lifetime in the nurturing culture of the Motherland lasted around 1,000 years. There are examples in the book of Genesis of Adam living for 930 years and Seth for 912 years. Genesis, as a highly condensed and selective account of prehistory, blends events on Lemuria, the Garden of Eden, with the later fall of Atlantis, Noah and the flood. But in the ages before the fallen angels arrived on Earth, each pristine Lemurian lifetime in innocence was a new lesson in the self-mastery of the body, mind, emotions, and spirit. Let's look at why the early Lemurians were innocent. This is a unified diagram of the individualized presence of God in formless spirit at the top, joined as one complete being with the soul on an expedition to gain mastery at the bottom. In the middle is the mediator, the Christ presence or the conscience, always perceiving simultaneously the perfection of God in formless spirit and the imperfection of the expeditionary soul being tested in the material world. Note the etheric threefold flame, pink, yellow, and blue, glowing from behind the physical heart in the lower figure. That threefold flame is the authority of the actual presence of God, or Emmanuel in the soul. Emmanuel means God is with us. I am in heaven and I am on earth simultaneously, as above, so below. When the three divine flames in the secret etheric chamber behind your heart are balanced in height, even if they're tiny, they can begin to rotate at a dazzling speed through love of God and His people, which becomes the resurrection flame and the lawful means to gaining immortality. That goal of immortality was the accepted norm in the Motherland long ago. The thing is, we still have that threefold flame, that same threefold flame alight in us right now, sometimes latent and sometimes more active, depending on what we're doing. When people talk about a warm feeling in their heart, it's not the physical heart, it's what's radiating from their hidden etheric flame in this secret chamber in here. And by the way, that violet color you see around the lower figure, that's visualized violet, and it's a big deal. Just as God visualized all of cosmos before the creation, you, as a son or daughter of God, have a micro version of that same capability. It's a family inheritance. You can regularly ask for God's guidance, God's will in what you create and uncreate. Why would you need to ask for God's help in uncreating? We're about to look at a mountain of misused creative energy that's accumulated in us since the time of Lemuria. If our speech and creativity is perfect in God's eyes, it's banked up in those colored spheres in etheric frequencies at the top of the chart. If not, it gathers invisibly around us and transfers from lifetime to lifetime as untransmuted astral baggage. As long as you retain that invisible karmic baggage, you'll keep reincarnating to repay the debts. All of us have made wrong choices over many lifetimes, but the gift of being able to uncreate or transmute God's energy trapped in us for centuries is a daily capability we'll look at again in a few moments. In the earliest ages of Lemuria, our Earth was a pristine etheric planet, meaning heavenly, which is what it's intended to return to in coming centuries. In those ancient ages, millions of years ago, the fall or the Great Rebellion had not yet occurred. Early Lemuria was host to three sequential groups of many millions of souls, or three root races, who were schooled in the mysteries of the resurrection and the ascension over 14 physical lifetimes of around 1,000 years each. Every one of those millions living in Lemuria graduated or ascended into immortality, what we might call an even higher etheric vibration or permanent heaven. They are still karma-free right now at a higher frequency on our planet. The common denominator in each graduate was an acceleration of devotional love for the qualities of the Divine Father as Spirit, the Divine Mother in form, and the one archetypal Word of God, which they came to individualize. This synthesis of the highest love in these first three root races resulted in their individual ascension into a mother-of-pearl cloud of light. This is the same etheric light we read about in the New Testament Gospels, where Jesus vanishes out of sight, or into a brilliant cloud on a mountaintop, or on the road to Emmaus, and in front of hundreds of witnesses near Bethany. That was the 9-foot-high whirling resurrection flame, a dazzling etheric light that precedes the permanent ascension flame. It radiates from your rotating threefold flame, and its power accelerates the rotation of the electrons around the nucleus in every atom in you. Eventually, the rotation of the electrons is so fast, as in disappearing quantum particles, that the body can't be seen in the visible spectrum anymore. It appears outwardly first as a brilliant halo, then a cloud emanating from your etheric heart. Inwardly, it's felt as transcendent love. We would consider that light extraordinary, even as it was in Jesus' time. In early Lemuria, it was the normal culmination of lifetimes of schooling in the resurrection power of the threefold flame, Emmanuel. This graduation resulted from great mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual mastery, sustained innocence, and a sense of joy. This was the original plan for Earth, not just for 3 etheric root races, but for 7 root races. Then, a tragic interruption occurred during the time of the 4th root race on Lemuria. Millions of years ago, the Luciferian rebellion in the etheric octaves we read about in the book of Revelation as the war in heaven reached our planet. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. What did cast out of heaven mean for millions of rebellious angels? God intended it to be their opportunity for remorse and redemption through service to humanity. That was their way out. But they saw it as prison without parole, because the way out involved surrendering their anger and disdain and humbly helping the 4th root race. There were very few takers, and in their fury, they decided to take over this beautiful planet, which they corrupted completely. What then of the 4th root race, the victims of the Luciferian invasion and subsequent global domination? Were they as innocent as the first 3 root races, or was something amiss? The answer has to do with free will. The 4th root race became karmically vulnerable to invasion by knowingly accepting and experimenting with evil. Evil behavior is the willful inversion of God's virtues. The first 3 root races actually studied evil from an objective point of view by being shown in their schools the Akashic records of humanity on other planets that had succumbed to evil. They knew the consequences of curious experimentation with the inversions of virtue and carefully avoided it. However, the 4th root race did take up the temptation to experiment and became karmically vulnerable. The immediate consequences were that the Archangel's protective shield around the planet that had sealed the previous 3 root races was broken. While we may think of the book of Revelation as allegory, it's also a cryptic and condensed prehistory summarizing events long before the Piscean Age in a non-linear way. It refers to the ancient warning for the 4th root race as, "Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman who brought forth the man-child." Angels of great attainment, who formerly served as invisible teachers and benefactors for humanity on Lemuria and elsewhere, were now confined in human bodies, subject to time, gravity, and physical death because of their rebellion. They had to reincarnate just like men and women and find a way to redeem themselves over an allotted time. How much time? God placed a cap on the number of their incarnations, which is what is meant by "he hath but a short time." For most fallen angels, That time is up now. But what about the 2/3 of the angels who didn't rebel and who stayed in the heavenly octaves, loyal to the will of God? One of them has pretty strong name recognition. We love him, and the remaining fallen angels still reincarnating on earth don't. This is Archangel Michael. The non-metallic sword or sacred word is made of impervious etheric light. The same word that sounded as the creative and sustaining fiat, "Let there be light." The fiat, or the sacred word of an archangel, is an expression of the will of God. Nothing can withstand it, and yet it can also convey the love of God as gentle words of comfort and encouragement. Look at the white light radiating from his heart and from his hands. Everything about Archangel Michael says, "I love you." The cosmic intensity of pure, radiating love is what forced angry Lucifer and the rebel angels out of the etheric realm and into the physical, the densest level of matter, where we are. They were given the chance to redeem themselves by dedicating their great skills to help the fourth and then the fifth and sixth root races by teaching the curriculum of the sons and daughters of God. But did they instead try to take advantage of humanity because they could? Lucifer was formerly the archangel of wisdom and illumination, but misused his free will to declare that the fourth root race was so slow to learn that they would never amount to anything. In fact, for him, the whole idea of teaching humanity on any planet was flawed, and he, Lucifer, concluded that he was like God anyway, and he announced that he had a much smarter way of running cosmos. To Lucifer, humanity was a waste of effort. They would never become Christ-like and should be discarded and recycled. Lucifer's lie about humanity was always ridiculous, because three groups of millions on etheric Earth, the first, second, and third root races, had already taken their time and ascended into immortality, one with the Word. Lucifer's cruel condemnation of the fourth root race was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Instead of helping them correct their errors, he completed their corruption, down to the subsistence level of cavemen. The entire tragic rebellion was false, right from its illogical conception. Fortunately, Archangel Michael was obedient to God. Lucifer, the former archangel, was reduced to the lowly station of a physical man, in and out of embodiment, an angry, powerful plutocrat, creating wars, mafias, and plagues throughout our history, but all the while subject to gravity, the accumulation of negative karma, and physical death, lifetime after lifetime. In the fall from the etheric or heavenly to the physical, the speed of the rotation of subatomic particles was greatly slowed and reduced to the physical spectrum, just like us. Of all the planets infected by Lucifer's rebellion, our Earth became the place where Lucifer focused most of his anger. We'll find out in a moment. Among the loyal angels in heaven, consider the divine strength and integrity of the great angel of wisdom and illumination who had earlier served under Lucifer, but who didn't succumb to rebellion. His name is Jophiel, now Archangel Jophiel, who was patiently taught infant humanity, illumination and understanding since the time of the rebellion, demonstrating infinitely greater angelic wisdom than the fallen Lucifer. If you're interested in a deeper understanding of why, when, and how a rebellion affecting a third of the angels could happen in heaven, and what the consequences for humanity on earth have been throughout history, this is Fallen Angels and the Origins of Evil. It includes the lengthy Book of Enoch about the crimes and consequences of a lustful and dominant group of fallen angels known as the Watchers. Our souls have lived through this history. Even though early church authorities excluded the Book of Enoch from the Bible because it implicated them, there are 72 pages of biblical parallels to the Book of Enoch and scriptural references to the watchers listed in Fallen Angels and the Origins of Evil, along with the spiritual solutions to their unwanted presence on earth. We who are the sons and daughters of God on earth are not meant to be passive. We are expected to follow Jesus' commanding example and bring Archangel Michael into our families, our homes, and work each day. Enoch said that he wrote about 366 books about fallen angels and their corruption of ancient civilization, but few have been preserved because they date to pre-deluge times on Atlantis. Many Aramaic fragments of the Book of Enoch have been recovered in the last few decades from the Qumran caves, which preserve the scriptures of the Essenes, showing the importance of Enoch to the Essene community. Additional apocrypha in Fallen Angels and the Origins of Evil include the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, all derivative of the same theme of evil personified in the physical. Why were angels of high attainment allowed to commingle with infant humanity when they were obviously mad as hell at the inconvenience of being human and mortal? They were remembered by God as once being perfect and greatly loved, and so were given their opportunity for redemption. A small minority actually realized their error in following Lucifer, and so for their sake, all were given an extended second chance. If these former angels would take up their roles as beneficial teachers and leaders of humanity, they could earn their ascension by grace in the exact same devotional process as men and women. But the majority of these once great angels retained a burning sense of grievance for being confined to their human condition, and lifetime after lifetime became warlords, black magicians, deceivers, and murderers. The history of our planet since then has been the endless record of their vanity and glamour, their rivalries, viruses, contrived famines, misery, and wars. The more immediate effect on the fourth root race and the motherly culture of Lemuria was devastating. The former angels inserted themselves as gods into the institutions of administration and devotion. They were idolized as superstars by the fourth root race, who, though they had much less attainment or experience, should have rejected the glamorous usurpers. There was no effective resistance from the people when those who, having such great attainment, turned government and the temples into places of prostitution, decadence, and human sacrifice. That lack of organized resistance, of millions failing to invoke the protective intercession of Archangel Michael, is retained to this day as negative karma by many otherwise good people around the world. Within time, the degradation of culture and corruption of commerce resulted in poverty, starvation, wars, and a steady descent over centuries into a godless animal state, Homo sapiens, or cavemen. Compounding the tragedy, the despair among the people resulted in many of them losing their threefold flame, the presence of God in them, and their chance for immortality. By cosmic law, our planet should have collapsed in on itself at that point because it had ceased to be a viable platform for the evolution of the divine presence in man, Emmanuel. But, unexpectedly, the quality of mercy intervened for Earth, and there was a staying action on cosmic law. This mercy was personified in a heavenly being known as Sanat Kumara, described in the Old Testament as the Ancient of Days, though he has a youthful appearance. Sanat Kumara and many others of great attainment continue to live in the etheric octaves of our neighboring planet Venus. We know the physical level of Venus is uninhabitable. But the etheric levels of Venus, those at higher vibrations, support abundant living conditions we would describe as heaven. To hold a balance or spiritual collateral under the terms of God's law, Sanat Kumara received permission from a cosmic council to volunteer to leave etheric Venus and to intercede for humanity on physical Earth. Sanat Kumara offered to be the sole devotee of God on Earth for as long as it took for civilization to be restored. It would be a long exile. But he would not be alone. The Akashic record of God's memory shows that 144,000 specially selected volunteers accompanied Sanat Kumara to Earth, determined that he would not have to endure the long-term exile without willing support on this planet. Few, if any, of these pure, advanced souls had any idea what they were getting into. Conditions on Earth at that time were shocking. Mankind had been effectively reduced to cavemen. Afflicted by starvation and roving warlords, Sanat Kumara established strategic outposts of civilization in several places on Earth. The main center became known as the White City of Alabasta on an island in the Gobi Sea, now the Gobi Desert, between China and Mongolia. His first gift to the illiterate, nomadic people of the area was the gift of fire. This was the origin of the tradition of the Yule log. Another outpost was located where the Austrian city of Vienna is now. People there still pronounce the name of their city as Wien, after Venus and its etheric music and architecture. Among the volunteers who came with Sanat Kumara were great devotees of the light who we now know as Enoch, Gautama Buddha, Maitreya, Jesus, Zarathustra, Krishna, Moses, Abraham, Melchizedek, and many others mentioned in the holy scriptures of the world's great religions. Sanat Kumara's plan was to acclimate the spiritually advanced volunteers, training them to adjust from their karma-free, pure etheric environment on Venus to the hellish environment of physical Earth, and to carefully prepare them to do for oppressed humanity what the fallen angels had refused to do. One of the greatest volunteer leaders, Maitreya, was tasked with establishing a preparatory school for the 144,000 specialists who had come to teach humanity the skills of agriculture, architecture, healing, literacy, numeracy, and devotion. The school curriculum was advanced, more than a mere briefing for a descent into hell. The extended training was step by step in the use of God's energy, with frequent testing designed to gradually overcome the dystopia on Earth without being overcome. The volunteers would be entering regions around the world which were controlled by angry and cunning former angels, rival mafias who were resentful of any interference in their Cosa Nostra, their feudal control over humanity. Maitreya's preparatory school was essential for practicing the spiritual mysteries that would face the 144,000. It was one of the largest Venusian establishments on Earth, known as the Garden of Eden. It was situated in a set-aside area in the east of Lemuria. This area here, around San Diego, is the land closest to where the Garden of Eden and that eastern part of Lemuria used to be. As far as we know, no other invaded planet across many galaxies received a determined intercession to restore civilization on the scale that Sanat Kumara mounted. That was why Earth got Lucifer's attention. Earth became central to the success or failure of his rebellion. But Lucifer, in his reduced human state, could not forget Archangel Michael and avoided a direct confrontation with Maitreya on Lemuria, one that Lucifer probably suspected he would lose. Instead, he chose the most charming and beguiling of his former angelic leaders, a talented sophist known as Serpent, to infiltrate Maitreya's school, blending in as one of the 144,000. Lucifer gave Serpent the key tactic, a roundabout way to destroy the purpose of the school without a fight. Lucifer knew and had already inverted all the mysteries the volunteers would eventually need to learn, which was the lawful use of God's energy to dissolve the cause and effect of evil. His counterplan was to direct Serpent to corrupt and compromise the entire body of 144,000 trainees. This was to be accomplished by turning their eagerness to please Maitreya into tempting them to go a step or two ahead of the curriculum before they had the full attainment of perfect discrimination in the use of God's energy. Artists' interpretation of the Genesis account of forbidden fruit on the tree of life usually features an apple. There were no apples involved. The tree of life is representative of the divine creative process and complex enough with the risk of willful or ignorant misuse that you could understand why Maitreya said, in effect, "Off limits until I decide you're ready." Serpent, in effect, countered to Eve. "You won't really die. That's an exaggeration." Eve could have said, "Let's check that with Maitreya." But she didn't. Maybe she was manipulated by a permissive energy field around Serpent known as animal magnetism. There was that moment where so much of consequence depended on her guardian action to discern Serpent's motive. Once the taint of knowing that virtue can be inverted for personal advantage with no awareness of the death of etheric innocence, the option to experiment with inversions became widespread in Eden by word of mouth. The curriculum and Sanat Kumara's plan could not continue with the taint of selfishness and ambition. The necessary standard for completing the mission in a dangerous environment was not upheld. Immediately after the fall of the Mystery School in Eden, Lucifer and those of like vibration and sympathy took advantage of the change in the balance of power on Lemuria. All levels of government and temple life were infiltrated and corrupted. At the time, there were 12 temple cities around Lemuria, with one great temple complex at the nation's center. The spiritual leader in the central temple held the high office of representative for the Divine Mother. Each successive leader embodied the spiritual essence of the Motherland. As the corruption of the outer temples unfolded in desecration such as ritual prostitution and human sacrifice, dark forces began to close in on the central temple. The priests and priestesses there were replaced, one by Satanist clergy, and when these betrayers ritually murdered the representative for the Divine Mother, there was no further purpose in the eyes of a loving God for Lemuria to continue as a platform for the growth of civilization. Some who were loyal to the Motherland escaped to Asia and South America with the teachings of the temples. And in time, the vast network of natural gas chambers under the continent collapsed. The surface of Lemuria was submerged under the Pacific. Over 64 million people died, and tsunamis, thousands of feet high, swept over the surrounding lands, the former colonies of Lemuria. To the few survivors in higher elevations of Asia and the Americas, it seemed like the end of the world. To the souls of the majority of the 144,000 well-intended volunteers from Venus, the shock of failure was beyond grief. Few understood why the cataclysm had occurred and their lives had been forfeited. After all, they had volunteered and been chosen. Without understanding their error, they resented the requirement to live by the sweat of their brow and reincarnate over and over on the dark planet they had come to rescue. Many would repeat a similar experience in the rise and fall of civilization on Atlantis some thousands of years later. This sense of overwhelming soul pain, of regret and remorse, is the source of the term Via Dolorosa, the sorrowful way. And yet, Sanat Kumara, Gautama Buddha, Maitreya, Jesus, Melchizedek, and other saints and the archangels never lost the vision of the restoration of civilization on earth. A small minority of the 144,000 would-be rescuers remained loyal. They calmly saw the setbacks for what they were, merely delays. From the perspective of those cosmic beings who see God's creativity from outside the karmic grid of time and space, there was a proven path to follow over the millennia, and God's pure desire for earth would not be thwarted. Here, in the present, on this beautiful coastline, we ask, where are the souls of the 144,000 volunteers from Eden living now? Most have no outer memory of the millennia that have passed by the sweat of the brow. Unresolved karma often requires that the soul reincarnate near the scene of the regret, along with the other people involved. Consider the wealth, ingenuity, creativity, and culture, flaws and all, of the good people living along the west coast of the United States, not that far from where Lemuria and the Garden of Eden used to be. Some are scattered around the world, reincarnating perhaps in the Lemurian colonies of New Zealand and Australia. But late in the last century, it was California that had a culture that led the world in a yearning for spiritual insight. That yearning still exists among old souls here, and hope continues as a hunch that the beauty, purity, nurturing, and achievements of the Motherland will rise again. But would these old souls recognize the outstretched hand if it were offered? Would they be grateful if it was Maitreya's hand, appreciate his understanding smile, and hold on? Remember I mentioned the patience of the archangels and the ascended masters, and that when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears. Maitreya hasn't forgotten one soul who volunteered to come from heavenly Venus to save Earth so long ago. He's aware that the travail of living by the sweat of the brow through many lifetimes in dark ages under tyrants leaves scars. Maitreya's response is comforting. He says, "Come and find me." It means make the determined effort, a lifelong effort of being kind, and he will appear to you many times through many people. After some time, you'll recognize Maitreya through the veils of interactions with other people, and the sheer repetition and ingenuity will make you both laugh. He's known as the Laughing Buddha. Earth now is definitely not the same as it was when Lemuria and Atlantis went down. The Luciferian consciousness has contributed nothing to civilization, merely delayed its rise. The tide of understanding has turned, and the question is given to you: what role will you take up again? This time, to pass the Edenic test of loyalty and win. The reason why it's more possible to win than ever before is that the tide of civilization on Earth has turned for the better. What events have occurred that make it better? In principle, the Luciferian rebellion in heaven was suicidal from its inception, and that is how it's played out. Here are the facts. Lucifer, the fallen archangel who was cast out of heaven millions of years ago by Archangel Michael, was bound by etheric light, tried by a council of sons and daughters of God in heaven, and sent to the second death, the dissolution of the soul, on April 26, 1975, as we count time. That's 50 years ago. Satan, the original murderer, was bound with light by Archangel Michael about the same time, but he refused to submit to his prophesied 1,000-year confinement, and with murderous intent deliberately triggered his final judgment and his second death to end his pain. Satan was tried by a council in heaven and sent to the second death 7 years after Lucifer in January of 1982. Many other fallen angels have received the same sentence since then. The trials continue. Far from earth, their leadership is no more. The second death is rare, but occurs through the same accelerating current of divine energy as the ascension process. When all of a being's repository of energy is misused energy, there's nothing left to ascend, and the entire record and memory of that once loved being is dissolved by purified sacred energy. In Revelation, this is described as the lake of fire. There's more. The judgment, also prophesied in the book of Revelation, took place in the last decades of the Piscean Age, not that long ago. The fallout from this event is still ongoing. Jesus, representative of the one Son of God, stood in his etheric body before the soul of every individual on earth during that time. He radiated the same intense love that formed cosmos. That's what the judgment is. In a binary decision, each soul either gravitated towards the love of the Son of God or rejected him. There was no one left sitting on the fence. The decision was binary. Light or darkness, love or rebellion. For those who chose darkness at the soul level of awareness, an intuitive knowing has filtered through to the conscious awareness. For them, the result is a sense of dread, weeping, gnashing of teeth, defiance, anger, grief, depravity, and depression as they live out the rest of their natural life. God always offers a way out, a redemption, but the price of surrendering pride and arrogance, bending the knee, and repaying and redeeming millions of wrong decisions, layers of karma accumulated from thousands of lifetimes, is in many cases too much for some to consider, let alone agree to. So they wait, and they fume, without being consciously aware of the reason why. They have rejected so many opportunities for turning it around over eons, and now it's come to this. Their time is up. But what now for Sanat Kumara's plan for Earth to gradually become an etheric planet? We've been looking back into our ancient history, but there is a forward story. This is important. The same cosmic council who once decreed the dissolution of Earth so long ago because of the descent of humanity into godlessness, also decreed that towards the end of the 21st century, from around 2080, that no more fallen angels, their offspring, or their sympathizers will be allowed to re-embody on Earth. By the time your children or grandchildren are elderly, Earth will actually be inherited by people of the light, those who are good to each other and to nature. After eons of the control of Earth's people, the Luciferians will all be gone. None of them will get to re-embody on a planet that God has decided will gradually become more etheric. That's just a few decades from now. You're witnessing this unfolding during your life, this life. What will your role be in accelerating this holy process, transmuting your own karma, and proving yourself to God throughout these years that have been given to you? One way is to share this video and to read. Here's where you can find the books I mentioned. It's summitlighthouse.org, store, books, then search for The Afterlife, What Really Happens in the Hereafter, Reincarnation, Stories of Mercy and Resolution, and Fallen Angels and the Origins of Evil. And if you're interested in learning about soul travel at night, briefings in heaven while your body sleeps, you can find this audio podcast series, Touring Heaven, on Spotify, Apple, and other podcast hubs. Or you can listen to Touring Heaven episodes on our dedicated website, ascendedmasterspiritualretreats.org. Click on the Touring Heaven podcast tab and scroll to the introduction. We travel in our etheric bodies to 16 different retreats of the Ascended Masters at higher frequencies of Earth, one at a time, and return safely. Sometimes we remember the music we hear in the Masters' retreats during the night. You can travel to heaven any night you want. Just offer a prayer to Archangel Michael for protection and guidance before bedtime. Tuition in the universities of the Spirit is free. The travel is free. And the kindness and wisdom of the Masters and Angels is uplifting for the soul. Please join us for episode 2 of Light Over Lemuria, when we explore another mystery, the founding and purpose of a new Garden of Eden. Thank you for spending time with me here on a beach, near where the original Eden was, hearing all this history, taking notes on these great books, and wondering what it means to be alive on Earth at this time when the tide of civilization is gradually turning towards a golden age, perpetually self-transcending.